Good day. The term duty of care is a legal and ethical concept that refers to the responsibility that individuals or organizations have to take reasonable steps to ensure the safety and well-being of others who may be affected by their actions or omissions. In the context of safeguarding children, duty of care refers to the legal and the moral obligation of individuals like you and me and organizations to take appropriate measures to prevent harm to children and to respond appropriately when harm is suspected or reported. So then the question is, how do we exercise the duty of care so that the lives of all our children are protected against abuse and neglect and all other forms of violence? My name is Tony Lawrence. I'm Managing Director of Safer Kids ZA, and I'm a child safeguarding specialist. And today we're going to look at the priority of child safeguarding in a very, very dangerous and hostile society, an imperative initiative, I believe, for the church in particular. And I may be singling out the church. These principles will apply to any organization, any whether it be sport or whether it be schools, ECDs, creches, wherever children gather. But my intention behind this is really to inspire the church to take that lead and to demonstrate how to implement effective safeguarding standards within the church context itself. So what is safeguarding in the first place? Why am I using the term safeguarding and not just safety or protection and so forth? Let's see. Safeguarding is protecting vulnerable people and especially children. And so we'll be focusing on children from abuse and neglect. And what we mean by safeguarding is that it is the action that is taken to promote the welfare of children and to protect them from any form of harm. So safeguarding means protecting children from abuse and maltreatment, especially from others, individuals, whether older than them or the same age, and preventing harm to children's health and development, ensuring children grow up with the provision of safe and effective care. So in essence, safeguarding is largely a preventative intervention or action that you can take. Prevention will always be better than cure. Why wait till something happens to a child and we fall over our feet to try and resolve that when, in my experience, just about anything and everything that adversely affects the child, that occurs within the life of a child, can and must be prevented. That's my mantra. And so what does the South African Constitution say in the Bill of Rights, Section 28, Chapter 2, that refers to the children? And it simply says that every child has the right to be protected from maltreatment, neglect, abuse, or degradation. And it's very straightforward. They're not to be treated badly or adversely. They should not be neglected. They should certainly not be abused or taken advantage of, especially physically, and any form of degradation, making them live the minor role on the outskirts, marginalized, and so on. They are equal citizens, if not more, a little bit more equal, because of their vulnerability. And then the child's best interests are of paramount importance in every matter concerning the child. So it doesn't matter what happens to the child. Their best interests must be taken into account first. So let's consider this. We have a South African Constitution. We've all seen it. We've all read it. And we know more or less what's in there. I certainly hope that you have read the Constitution cover to cover. The Constitution, next to that, is our government. And it's their role to ensure that all of the rights and responsibilities enshrined in the Constitution is put into effect. One of the ways that government does that is by promulgating legislation. So there are acts, there are pieces of legislation that will speak to many, or if not all, of those rights in the Constitution itself. And then there are organizations and institutions and so on where children will find themselves, like at schools, at the sports club, in church, the Sunday school, the youth group, and so forth. And then we have the parents before we get to the child. And so on the left, we have the Constitution. On the right, we have the child. However, everything in the red square, everything in between has to work together properly, synchronized, operational, and effective in order for the child to enjoy their rights and the benefits of their rights as enshrined in the Constitution. We can't expect the children to breathe life into their constitutional rights. It's up to us in the red square, and all these areas need to work together. So consider the following 3 questions, and imagine I'm a parent and I'm coming up to you. You're a leader in a church, a pastor, a youth leader, Sunday school teacher, children's worker, volunteer you happen to work with in the context of the church. And I asked the following question: as a church or an organization, how do I know my child is safe when they are in your care or on your premises? What have you done to safeguard my child while they are with you? How would you answer that question? What would you say? What have you done to safeguard my child? Question 2. Do you have a child safeguarding policy in place that demonstrates your commitment to the safety of the children in your care? And if you have one, may I have a copy? Because it should be a public document in the first place. If you don't have one, maybe you have reason to be concerned. Consider question 3. Are the leaders, the board members, the management, the teachers, caregivers, volunteers, the overseers, the coaches, the trainers, and all other staff that works with or near children, have they been appropriately screened against the sex offenders and the child protection registers as required by law? Those are 2 separate registers, and I will refer to them a little later again. But has everybody been appropriately screened and regularly screened at least every 2 years? Where do you start? Well, firstly, I believe all ministries, churches, or all places that are frequented by children, that they acknowledge the potential for child abuse. A child can be abused in a variety of ways, and I'll touch on those. And we must understand it can happen anywhere. And that's been my experience across multi-denominations, different church backgrounds and settings. You have read reports in newspapers and so on of child abusers in churches. So it's not new to us. It does happen. And then we should develop a child abuse prevention program, which includes robust employee and volunteer screening procedures. That's the bottom line. We have to start somewhere. And it starts by sitting down and developing that program. There are many action steps to take. I'm going to mention some of them for you. But before we get there, what is abuse? Well, we have emotional abuse, where we intimidate people emotionally and we play on their emotions and we try and get them to do things or obey you, obey rules, and so on. But we pry on their psychological and emotional well-being. Then there's sexual abuse, and that's very straightforward as well. In other words, called rape or adult on child molestation. Sexual abuse, very prevalent. And South Africa is known to be the rape capital of the world. That's true. A professor at Northwest University told me that the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency in the USA, has classified South Africa as the pedophile capital of the world. That's very serious. We don't talk about these things. They're real. Then there's physical abuse, excessive disciplining, punching in the face, beatings and hidings and so on, that may be unjustified. And we need to look at that. There might be physical abuse. One other way would be underage children working, and child labor is also very, very prevalent. And then we have neglect, and that's just not caring for the child at all. And we leave them to their own devices. And that's another form of abuse. And then I thought very pertinent would be the fifth one. Normally we talk about the first four, but I believe spiritual abuse is also very, very real. And that is when we use the word of God, the Bible, to threaten and so on. God will punish you if you don't do what I say. So let's not ignore the fact that spiritual abuse is also very, very real. And who are the abusers? What do abusers actually look like? If I had to ask you what a pedophile looks like, what would you say? Is he this dark and sinister person with shaded sunglasses and so on, really looking sinister and like a predator? Or does an abuser look like you and me? These are some of the Americans that have been charged in a court of law for abusing children. We've seen those names all over the media. In fact, for some of them, Netflix videos and documentaries have been made. But what about in South Africa? Now, there might be one or two people we'll recognize. These come from local newspaper reports. Famous one there, who would have thought that the Minister of Police would be taking boys to an island called Bird Island to abuse them. These are real people, and they look like you and me. So how does abuse happen? Well, in the context of the church, we rely heavily on volunteer help in children and youth ministries. We're always looking for more people to come and help in our Sunday schools and so on. I've actually seen in some congregations, we make an announcement on Sunday, we need a Sunday school teacher for grade 5. Somebody raises their hand. On Tuesday, they get given the curriculum, and then next Sunday, they have their class. So we've not even done a background check. So we need the volunteers, but especially volunteers need the background check. And then as churches, we often have large numbers of children. Obviously, they come, but we have weak abuse prevention policies and a shortage of willing workers and a culture that sees the good in people. We know that. We have the faithful and the trusted leadership, and we don't really think that they could ever do anyone any harm. We have to be careful of that. And we have to ensure that those risks are minimized to the best of our ability. Our credibility is at stake. And then the ministries tend to have lax screening procedures and policies. I've said that before, and It's very, very important. These weaknesses and inefficiencies will place the children at risk of being abused. I can quote many instances in a variety of churches. I think you know yourself. You may Google it, you may search on YouTube, and you will find their stories. It happens. So how does a predator operate? What are their secret techniques? We call it grooming. So they will prepare their victim over time before they actually pounce in a physical sense. And so they will select their victim. They will gain the trust by cultivating friendships with the gatekeepers, like their parents. And I found that single mothers are the most vulnerable in this regard, because they're seeking the help, to contribute towards income and so on, to support the household. And sometimes the selection of such a person is not done carefully enough. And I know of instances of a predator preying on single mothers to get to their children. So they're going to play the game both ways. They normally offer gifts like sweets and jewelry, money, etc. They pay compliments, they lavish attention. They are the Mr. Nice guys, or the Miss Nice lady, sometimes ladies involved as well. Then they gain access by finding and creating situations to be alone with the victim. You know, the day when mommy says, oh, I've got to go for that interview, but will you look after my child for the 3 hours I will be away? And the door opens for the predator to pounce. Creating opportunities to slowly establish an increasingly physical connection. So they will start touching, and they tickle, and they hug, and they kiss, and so on. And we're moving now from verbal interaction to actually physical interaction. And obviously, one thing will eventually lead to another. And they will also encourage or threaten a child to keep this special secret by using shame and blame. I'll tell your mommy if you don't keep quiet. I'll tell her the truth of what actually happened. And so there will be threats, and that's obviously psychological abuse as well. So I asked 2 or 3 organizations about disclosure, and when we see something happening to a child, what should we do, and whether we should do anything in the first place. Well, it's legislated that if we know about abuse, the law will mandate us to report it. We have to speak up. We have to tell somebody who can take the appropriate action if we are not able to do that. If we don't, we will be equally guilty of whatever happened to that child. We cannot just be innocent bystanders. We have to get involved. If we do report, but the abuse was found not to be abuse, and so we most probably made a small mistake, nothing can happen to you. So we must never worry about what will happen to us if we report. Think about what will happen to the child if we don't report. Rather safe than sorry. And for that, all of us, adults of whatever age, over the age of 18, we have the duty of care of the children. And we have to step up to that plate and do what is necessary for the safeguarding of every child. Abuse has a devastating and a long-term effects on a child. The younger they are when it happens to them, the longer it stays with them until old age. And I have spoken to people in their 60s who were abused when they were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old as an altar boy or a choir boy at church by a minister. And nobody listened to them their entire lives. And they just did not want to go to their graves with that on their conscience, the abuse will have a devastating effect on the child. Therefore, we have to prevent it from happening in the first place. So what can we do as organizations that minister to children? I'm going to give you a number of examples. They're all equally important. And it starts with developing an effective and implementable child safeguarding policy after an intensive risk assessment exercise. So you first have to sit down with all the role players in your church and list what are the areas of risk that the children may face when they are with us, either on that premises, or sometimes we take them on camps or excursions and so on. What are the risks that they face? And then write down how you're going to mitigate those risks. What are you going to put in place to ensure that that risk never becomes a reality? Once you've got all of that, you draft your child safeguarding policy. There are many formats. There are lots you can download. We can talk about, maybe I'll have a template or two for you that you can tweak and change and adapt to your own circumstances. So the policy, the safeguarding policy is mandatory right up front because it will set the guidelines for everybody to follow. You don't just want a disciplinary policy. When somebody steps out of line, these are the disciplinary steps you will take. We don't want that. I mean, yes, we need that, but that follows. The first thing is prevention. And what do we do so that no harm can come to a child? Then we'll never need to discipline in the first place. So let's get the order of things right as well. Then we develop the processes and procedures, protocols, and so on that both prevent children from coming to harm, as well as what will we do in the likely, unlikely event that a child does come to harm. You have to look at both sides of the coin. And then we're going to say that only people will be allowed with a proven track record and all the relevant references, appropriate clearances, and who share the same passion for the safety of children. It's not just the project they will run. It's not just the Bible stories they will tell, but it's also they have a passion for the safety and the safeguarding of the children. So that will qualify them to be able to work with or near children. Not only with the children, but those who will work near the children. And then we will review those policies and procedures on a regular basis. I always say once a year, take a look again, see if every clause, every action still applies. If not, make the necessary changes and train everybody accordingly. Now, I'm also a vetting and screening agent, so I can do police clearances, criminal checks, sex offenders, register checks, child protection register checks, and so on. What are the advantages and the benefits of vetting and screening of those working with or near children? And these are some of the benefits I've picked up over time. It provides a safer environment for children free of the presence of predators and abusers. That's obviously the aim of the whole exercise. You want the children to enjoy a safe environment where they do not have to fear for their lives, or where there's no one person intimidating them unnecessarily during the course of their stay on the premises. So it provides a safer environment. The second thing is, if we screen everybody, then the church will be in compliance with the law and it avoids possible prosecution. Now, you don't want a leader with inappropriate action and behaviors, private WhatsApp messages to one of the children, asking for naked photographs or so on. A parent lays a charge against the church, and it is found that the church never checked whether this staff member or this volunteer, for that matter, whether the person was appropriately screened or not, because the likelihood might be that the person already has a criminal record in that regard of child abuse. So you want to be in compliance of the law. And I think that's a biblical reference as well, that even as a church, we have to abide by the laws of the country. And then screening acts as a deterrent for perpetrators and wannabe perpetrators. Some people might have beautifully clean credentials in terms of criminal records. They have nothing on file. The names are not on those registers, but they may just not have been caught out yet. And when we perform these checks regularly, if there is a perpetrator and if there is someone that has unethical behavior, they will soon get a little worried that maybe one day they will get caught out. So screening demonstrates effective child safeguarding prevention strategy implementation. You'd want to be able to speak about that with confidence, because it enhances the integrity of the church. You can feel proud that your church is at the forefront of ensuring that everybody is qualified enough, not by education or by academic performance only, but in their overall conduct and good standing in the community, but also their reference checks and their appropriate screening against the registers has been done and they're clear. And so it does enhance the integrity of the church. And for me, most importantly, it creates a sense of peace of mind. We don't have to worry and wonder, have we done enough, or can we move that to the side? That's not such a high priority right now. Our programs are maybe more important than that. I'm going to turn that upside down and say, before you can do any ministry, you open a new branch of your church, you start a new organization where you're going to accommodate children and that. Before you get to programs or anything like that, and activities and apparatus and books and stuff, before you get there, do the right thing. Make sure that those who are going to work in that environment have been appropriately, and I use the word appropriately, that means according to law, have been screened properly. And I think what really stands out, and I will have a video in the future interviewing 2 churches on the impact of having done vetting and screening. It sends a clear message, and they told me just the other day that it sends a clear message to the congregation, but also to the community, that this church is serious about the safety of the children in their care. And that's critical. And that would be something really good to speak about. That the message is, we have done it in our church, and that is an example we would like to set for the rest of our community. And then I found that one of the good interventions one can apply is to appoint and train child safeguarding officers, or DSOs. Now, they are the go-to persons. They've been trained to be officers. These are ordinary people, and but because of their passion and compassion for children and their safety, they've been trained to be able to look out for potential problems and so forth. So they will implement the safeguarding procedures and the policy and so on. They'll make sure that it's not just a document, but it becomes something at the forefront of our minds. They will communicate policy matters and procedures regularly. They'll put it in the newsletter, in the weekly leaflet. They'll give items to the pastor to preach about, and so on. They communicate policy matters about children and their safety. We have to continuously remind people. You can't develop a policy and put it in a filing cabinet and never refer to it. Those clauses in there, those actions, those procedures must be breathed life into by getting it out there into all the spaces so that everybody knows what they're all about. The safeguarding officers will also understand and implement constitutional and legal aspects of safeguarding. So they will understand what the law says and how to interpret it and how to make sure that the church is compliant with the law. Then they understand the modus operandi of sexual predators. So they will know how to look out for, anyone with not the right intentions, for example. They will be able to identify grooming methods, and they will know how to deal with such. They will also know how to deal with disclosure. And for me, when a child steps up and wishes to disclose what someone has done to them, that first testimony has to be done properly so that one day it may have to stand up in a court of law. And so safeguarding officers are trained on how to take that disclosure statement when a child wants it. It's not for anybody and everybody to just dive in. You can tell me, my child, you can know, you need to have designated persons who can handle that scenario very, very carefully. We want, if there was a criminal act against that child, we will want the law to succeed in bringing the criminal to justice. And that first disclosure, that first testimony of the child, taking that down is critical, that it is done properly. Then the safeguarding officers will also communicate. They speak about this stuff all the time, and they will also speak to the children and help them to understand that this is supposed to be a safe environment. If you feel threatened or you feel uncomfortable about how somebody is touching you or so, speak up. There are people that are there set aside to help you. Okay. Now, my theory of change is, I always say we start at the top. And so if the leadership, the management, the board, the executive, whoever is in charge, the council, let's start with them. And you're obviously going to think of the policy you're going to put together and so on. You're going to get the right people to do the necessary. And then you're also going to be part of the screening process. And you're going to speak about this maybe on Sundays. You're going to put it in your newsletter. In your congregation, there are parents, and they are noting that. And they are starting to feel comfortable that this church is doing the best they can to safeguard my child. But some of the parents may also be workers, teachers, and so on in other organizations or in schools. And so hopefully they will take the message to those institutions where they might themselves have placed their children, and hope that those institutions will also change. And so what started in the church has now filtered right across our communities and has impacted other NGOs, not only other NGOs, but also other churches, other institutions, and also potentially the companies and places of work and so on as well. But it starts with us as leaders. We have to demonstrate that we are serious about the safety of children. Now, to end off, I thought maybe a few Bible verses about what God says about his children, because they belong to him, obviously. Matthew 19, verse 14, let the children come to me. Jesus demonstrated this big time. He didn't say, bring the old people to me, or bring the middle-aged people or that. Not that they are not important, but for some reason, he really picked on the importance of the children coming to him. Let's not hinder them. Let them come to him. So he must have had a very high regard for children. Let's look at some verses. Psalm 127, verse 3. Children are a heritage from the Lord, an offspring offspring a reward from him. Okay? Absolute focus on the child. They are a heritage, they're a gift. They are given by God himself. Psalm 8, verse 2, through the praise of children and infants, you have established a stronghold. Think about that. It's through the praise and the worship of children and infants and their voices rising up to heaven, God establishes a stronghold against our enemies to silence the foe and the avenger. If we ever thought of a weapon against all of the travesty around us and the problems in our country and that, let the children sing and praise in a safe environment, obviously, and God will do the necessary. Mark 10, 13 to 16, people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. And when Jesus saw this, he said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them. For the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly, I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom like a little child, with the faith of a child, will never enter it. Absolute importance Jesus places on the lives of those children. And they become the examples he will use for us adults to change our behavior, to become like the children. We must have the faith of a child if we're ever going to see the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 18, 1 to 5. And again, Jesus asking the disciples, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus was a teacher with demonstration. And he called a little child. We don't hear of a response from the disciples, but he goes immediately and calls a child, and he places the child amongst them, and he says, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. We know the scriptures. We know them backwards. Put them together, and we get a consolidated view of God's seriousness about the care of our children. Matthew 8, 18, 10. See that you do not despise one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. I never knew that children had their own angels in heaven, special. They had special oversight. And that's exciting, that there's a warning to us. Do not despise them. Do not neglect them. Do not chase them away, but embrace them like Jesus would have done. For I tell you that the angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. Children already have the connection with God. When we grow up, we lose that connection and have to return to God and repent of our sin. But children in their innocence are already connected with God. They're the heritage given by God. We cannot take that away. We need to nurture it and develop it within a safe environment. James 1, 27, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after the orphans and widows in their distress. Again, another emphasis on children. Mark 9, 36 and 37, he took a little child whom he placed among them, taking the child in his arms, and he said, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. The list goes on. I could not tell you about child safeguarding if I did not find it so relevant within the scripture itself. Be warned, be aware, be vigilant, be proactive. That's my underlying message to all of you. Let's consider that the official South African crime statistics show that an average of 3 to 4 children are murdered in South Africa every day. That's over 1,000 every year. Why? What could a child have done to hurt anybody else sufficiently for that child to be murdered? Somebody tell me. Over 8,000 children were victims of physical assault in 2021. And these were only the cases that were reported. They say 90% of child rape, of all rape, is not reported. Only 10% is. Somebody went to SAPS and registered, I was raped, or my child was raped. Only 10%. So the numbers of victims that we read about is only 1/10 of, or less, of what has actually happened in society. And if 8,000 were victims, multiply that by 10 at least to get a more realistic number of how many children was abused, were physically assaulted. Why? Can that not have been prevented? I'm a firm believer, yes. The question is, where do we start? And so in conclusion, the great Madiba said, our children are our greatest treasure. They are our future. Those who abuse them tear the fabric of our society and weaken our nation. And I would like to conclude with, our nation is weak, absolutely weak, because of the abuse of our children. They are getting a raw deal, and we have to stand up for the sake of our future and future generations to come. If we don't turn it around, who will? And that's my cry and my plea to the church. Thank you for listening. If you need help whatsoever, you need the tools to be able to implement the highest standard of child safeguarding. You need to do a policy. You need training in child safeguarding. You need to be screened and vetted and so on. Whatever within this video you feel you want to brush up on, you can let me know. That's my email address and my phone number, and I'll be too happy to help you. And so from me, Tony Lawrence, thank you for listening and watching, and may God bless you as you safeguard our children.